in waiting for that recognition, you are giving away a lot of your power. And in taking on board too much of the ridiculous stuff that people said about my appearance, I would be giving away that power.
Welcome back to Season 2 of the Business Culture Podcast, a platform to learn through the power of context and story. It's great to be back with you. This season is all about impact. I'll be chatting to impact makers across industries and geographies to understand how they have made true impact on their customers, colleagues, and communities. In this episode, I got to chat with Elma Smit. Having recently covered both the Cricket and the Rugby World Cups in England and Japan respectively, Elma graciously gives us a behind-the-scenes perspective on what it's like to create a personal brand in the world of content creation, an individual who continues to make global impact in very much her own authentic way. Let's hear her story. One thing that struck sort of a chord with me when we discussed it before is that you didn't really ever want to be a presenter per se up front. It wasn't your end goal necessarily.
No, so I, contrary to what people think, I consider myself a broadcast specialist who works in, particularly these days, rugby, a bit of cricket, sport generally. But I think I see myself primarily as someone who makes content, often for video, sometimes radio. But I think of ways to communicate stories that make people feel part of a greater whole. And I think for me, the relationship with rugby started long before I realized that it was there. I was 9 years old in 95. So obviously the Rugby World Cup made a massive impact on me. I remember the first democratic election, the fear. We were living in Bloemfontein at that stage. I couldn't speak English to save my life. And there was obviously, this great unknown new South Africa that we didn't know where we fit in. And then the Rugby World Cup kind of gave us that cultural answer, that kind of legitimacy that we have a contribution to make, particularly being Afrikaans. And then I studied law, but I loved radio. I got my first radio as a birthday gift when I turned 11, and I obsessively listened to 5FM. And when I was in high school, I decided that I wanted to work for 5FM. As what, I wasn't quite sure. TV wasn't really my plan. Radio really was the dream. And I knew already when I was about 12 what I wanted to study, down to almost, the subjects I wanted to take. I knew I wanted to study law. But I didn't see myself only as an attorney. I always had this idea that I would probably have to do a few things because I've always had a wide range of interests. And so radio was always going to be part of something, it was always going to be part of the plan. So I started in community radio when I was in high school. There was a community radio station in Paarl where I went to high school, Radio KC 108.8 FM, the sound that sets you free. And most of our listeners were in prison because Paul has plenty of prisons.
Yeah.
So they would listen to us from prison, and I co-hosted a Saturday evening show. And so that was my first into radio. I studied law at Stellenbosch and then worked at MFM and really immersed myself in that experience. Absolutely loved every moment of it, but I also loved studying law. And then at the end of my degree, I had gained acceptance to a very small postgraduate journalism program at Stellenbosch that they only took 20 students a year for. But then in the same week, I got offered a TV presenting job with MCAR, which was a music channel, a lifestyle channel on DSTV, and had to make a call and submitted a late entry to do a similar kind of journ postgrad at Wits. Got accepted and then moved to Joburg with what I could fit into my mom's Corolla in a week. And then started hosting this music TV show, did my postgrad studies at Wits, actually worked as a football reporter covering the Clever Boys at Wits as well for the newspaper while I was doing this music show. So on Thursdays, I was this rock and roll chick with mohawk and crazy makeup on TV going, "Fuck off, polisie car." And then for the rest of the week, I was covering football and doing the layout of the newspaper bits. And then worked at 5FM and MCAR and really immersed myself in the music scene. I hosted I went to Opikopi for about 12 years straight. I was the MC for about 5 or 6 of them. Interviewed international musos like Jared Leto and, like a whole list of them. Everyone who came to South Africa, we featured and worked at 5FM behind the scenes as music compiler and eventually as DJ. So I had built a pretty solid kind of career in music for 5 years before SuperSport announced that they were going to take a woman to the Rugby World Cup. And I watched this with keen interest, but I initially thought they were looking for a Nas Botha or a Nick Mallet, someone who had an analyst's level of experience and who would be able to do commentary. And obviously that wasn't me. I went to Paul Gym. I studied at Stellenbosch. I had, kind of great interest and cultural affinity with rugby, but I didn't consider myself an analyst. And then I saw the first few rounds of auditions, and they were asking contestants things like, how long is a half in rugby? And then she would say, which half? And I cringed for my kind. And I was very hesitant about entering because I didn't want to fail. Because I was already working in TV, a lot of the same crew. What people don't know is the same people who hold the cameras and who do the graphics and who work in the machine at SuperSport also worked for KykNet and for MCAR, where I was at that stage doing pretty well as a presenter. So I'd established myself and I didn't want to kind of throw my hat in the ring in something and then, fail horribly. So I checked out the opposition first, and then after a while checking out the opposition at the last opportunity that you could audition, I went to the audition. And obviously now I'm really glad that I did. But at the time it was very scary because there was also quite a bit of backlash to this idea that they were now going to pluck a woman from relative obscurity and then she just gets a free pass to go to the Rugby World Cup. And that was conflicting for me. I worked with Gareth Cliff closely at that stage at 5FM and considered him a colleague that I got along with well. And he was one of the people who tweeted a quite arrogant takedown of the whole concept of Lady Rugger. And I still replied to him and said, if this is the only way that someone like me will get an opportunity to work in a field that I never deemed a real gap for myself, then how is this bad? How is it bad for women? But also, how is it bad for the sport if you are visibly and literally opening the doors and showing inclusion, not showing that I'm a former player who knows everything about rugby, just showing that I can ask questions that will make the sport more accessible to a wider variety of people. If I could care about rugby enough to study it and ask insightful questions that open the appreciation of it up to a wider variety of people, how is that bad for rugby? And so it was an attractive opportunity for me because I have always been drawn to the idea of trying to work on the innovative edge of things. So at MCAR and at 5FM, at MCAR we were obviously, breaking some new ground. At 5FM, I was breaking ground because people used to laugh in my face when I said that I wanted to work there because I'm Afrikaans, and there really was this steady stream of Rhodes Music Radio people that would just automatically be adopted. And then at one point, Tux FM people used to do pretty well at 5FM. But from Stellenbosch, there was no precedent. There was no predecessor. There was no clear path in, and particularly with my very heavy Afrikaans accent, Grant Nash from Grant and Anele used to say that I sounded like a homeless person and that I should never speak English to anyone on camera or on a microphone. But I've obviously worked on that a lot. I mean, I literally couldn't speak English when I was 19. So I had to really break through the barrier that everyone was kind of telling me existed, but also the one that existed in my own head. And then when I was already at 5 as a music compiler, I had to figure out whether I believed someone with an Afrikaans accent was relevant in that market. And Jack Barrow did quite a bit on that on that front.
Yeah.
Because as soon as he was playlisted, and I was obviously directly influencing his playlisting because I wanted to see what the response would be like. And as soon as we playlisted Culeras Akke, the response from people who were not Afrikaans was strangely fascinating, and they found it interesting. And I realized that being the Afrikaans chick in an environment where that wasn't the done thing wasn't necessarily a bad thing. And I think that helped me a lot in how I then found my feet at Supersport, because just because it hadn't been done before doesn't mean that it's illegal. It doesn't mean that there is no use or no point to this. It doesn't mean that I'm just riding the coattails of my gender or riding the coattails of politically correctness. I am also there to make a contribution, to find a way of broadening the appeal of the product that we are creating.
Do you think, Alma, like to that extent or that point, that you see yourself as quite a fearless person in the sense that, a lot of people would look at that prospect and go, wow, that's a lot to take on. That this is the status quo. This is how things are done. It's this type of person who does it. Do you think that from your personality perspective, you are quite less fearful than the average person, or do you think it's something which you just plucked up a lot of courage to do and, obviously nervous at the time, but, just made it happen?
It was very scary. So I wouldn't say that I'm fearless. I've felt it very, very a real level of absolute terror. But I have always leaned into risk, I think, more than most people. And I have a very direct, some people would use the word aggressive, way about me. My mom has, for the longest time since I was a very young girl, said to me, "Do not be so demanding, please," because people don't respond to that very well. And so I think that luckily that is probably something that stood me in good stead. Obviously, it does tick people off, and I've learned that the hard way. But luckily I grew up in a household where my mom loves rugby, not my dad. And I only have a sister. And so there was no gender limitation in our little household space on who was allowed to have an opinion on the rugby, because my dad was reading Landbou Weekblad and my mom was shouting at the ref, because my mom grew up with brothers and a dad who were obsessed with rugby. And so in our household, there was never this, shh, sit down, the men are now doing this. None of that existed. And I think that changes the way that I also looked at my level of entitlement about being interested in rugby. There was no reason why I couldn't shout at the ref as well. My mom's doing it. And my mom is this demure Afrikaans tannie that I do not take after in any other way. So I think that also obviously helped.
Yeah, it's interesting, that nature versus nurture thing that you're kind of speaking about there, because I think a lot of, dare I say, a lot of sort of Afrikaans people, I can just take my parents as an example, half Afrikaans, half English, have grown, I can see that there's legacy habits there that have been born out of just purely the fact that that's how things were done. And depending on your personality, you either overcome those quite quickly to be the person you're meant to be, or that kind of sits with you for the most of your part of your life. So it's interesting that you kind of perhaps had a more fortunate dynamic in that sense, but still, I mean, there's still a lot of elements that you had to face, I think, throughout your career, which required quite a lot of bold, courageous kind of decisions that needed to be made along the way. What were some of the more sort of hair-raising moments along the way, without giving anyone a bad rap or
I've been told that I shouldn't be wearing high heels. I'm tall enough as it is. I've been told to perhaps sit down more often, because it intimidates my colleagues that I am on eye level with them or taller than some of them. Stupid things like that. I've been told that my eyebrows are too dark, literally by people I report to, and I'm like, I was literally born. This is the color they are. Like, it doesn't come off. I've had such crazy things. I've literally had emails sent to like 5 different people CC'd about my hair looking unwashed on camera on a day where I had literally been to the salon I happened that day to have been to the salon, and they had actually blow dried it really nicely. And then there were emails sent about Elma's hair looking unwashed. So it's so funny, the stuff that sometimes happens behind the scenes, because you're just like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
But I don't think that only happens to me. I think that that's just the function of working in this environment, that your appearance is, I mean, people have very direct opinions on what you should be looking like, because you are the face of their product. And this isn't by any means just limited to the work that I did at SuperSport. This stems from the first TV show I did to, across the board. And you do develop a weird thing in, I have, maybe it's a defensive mechanism where my appearance is like equipment, which sounds weird, but I consider my hair color and makeup and what people give me to wear on camera the way that I think photographers do the kind of cameras and lenses and equipment they use. It's not who I am. It's a tool of the trade. And you have to really distance yourself from that. I shaved my hair at university, and I never used to wear makeup on campus. And so it's not like I was ever that girl anyway. I don't think that I've ever attached too much of my self-worth in the way that I carry myself visually. It has only ever really been a means to an end. And I think that that's helpful when you are a woman who work in a very visible environment, because you will get very ridiculous criticism, not only from uninformed viewers, people on Twitter, trolls who say that literally, this is a recurring theme, that I had a nose job, a botched nose job even sometimes, when this is literally the nose I was born with. So you really need to develop, as a defense mechanism, I think, a healthy amount of distance between what people think and feel about your appearance, and how much of that actually impacts on you personally.
I think a testament to your longevity so far is that very fact that you've it hasn't been about the superficial stuff. It's been about the intellectual property and the intellectual value add that you kind of bring to whatever you're doing. Because I think innately that's where the core value lies, I think, as you've alluded to. I just wanted to touch on that point where, I mean, I'm laughing internally at those ridiculous emails that flew around. The reality being is that that can knock some people off, the more sensitive people off quite badly in terms of a career. And I think a lot of people listening will probably face something in their own context to a similar extent. What was your kind of approach, and what has been your approach to overcoming those? I mean, is it just something that water off a duck's back, or is it, have you had a process of getting over that kind of thing?
I think that what people, and I always explain this to players as well, what people need to understand about particularly being a freelancer and doing what we do, but being a player is very similar. And I think a lot of people who work independently or as consultants, or even kind of high-ranking executives who really try and make a mark, is we tend to think that if I just do enough to impress this one key person in this one key position, they one day will have an epiphany. They will have a moment where they'll go, wow, this person has really gone above and beyond, and they will tap you on the back and go, well done, that'll do, pig, that'll do. And suddenly you would have arrived. You would receive the recognition you have always earned and desired. And suddenly that will make everything else worthwhile. And all of these poo sandwiches that you've been eating for how long suddenly will feel like they were worthwhile. But I think that in waiting for that recognition, you are giving away a lot of your power. And in taking on board too much of the ridiculous stuff that people said about my appearance, I would be giving away that power. But it extends to far more than what people thought of my appearance. It extends to the criticism you get for the way you do your work, the fact that you don't get the recognition you desire. And I think it extends far beyond people who work in media and rugby players, because we all probably look at one person in an organogram somewhere as the linchpin, the kind of the door, the valve that'll kind of open up an entire new world of possibilities and opportunities for you. If only I could get this one person to recognize the value that I hold. And I realized a few years ago that if I chose myself, if I was the coach, and I went, you know what, you have done enough. What you bring to the table is so cool. If you choose yourself and you find ways of bridging that gap in your head where it doesn't matter what someone else thinks of the efforts that I'm putting in, I need to find ways of doing what I'm doing for me. I need to find ways of finding the recognition in myself. If I do work that I honestly love, where I had this moment yesterday where I was interviewing Jake White in a Straatligkinders t-shirt sitting here and asking him a brilliant question that someone I know sent in, and he gave a brilliant answer to it. And I sent them the clip and I was like, look, he answered your question and he was so rad about it. And they were like, how is this your job?
Awesome.
And I went, I know, how is this my job? So if you find that bit of validation in yourself, where you choose yourself and you are your own coach, going, well done, that was actually bloody good, regardless of what anyone else says. If you're not giving away that power, you tend to start doing better work. And then the recognition almost happens, but then it doesn't matter. For me, if the work we did with Rugby World Cup Daily in Japan last year was so much fun to do. I've never worked that hard in my life, but it was so much fun to do. I enjoyed just being there, just doing it, just putting it out. That if someone woke me up now and said all of those episodes were deleted and somehow no one actually saw it, there was no public recognition, nothing comes of it, you will never get any work based on these efforts, no one actually saw it, it would still feel worth it for me, because I got so much out of it. It was such a thrill to produce. And I think that once you take that power back, it often frees you up to not be too reliant. But I mean, I battle with this on a daily basis, so I have not.
Yeah, look, it's not as easy as said as, you know. There's a lot more pieces to it, but I think what you've said is so vital to so many people, in that it makes you more bulletproof. It makes you more resourceful. And I think the last thing that you said, which is so key, is that it allows you to kind of do or be more free in terms of your work. I think there's a lot of fear out there where people are too scared to put something out because they're too scared of what people are going to say
or
the reaction to it.
Your ideas. It just allows you to be more generous.
Correct.
It just allows you to go, you know what, I'm going to do this regardless of what your reaction is going to be. I'm going to produce this. I'm going to put this out there. I'm going to share this. I'm going to literally put my trade secrets out there on a platter for the world to consume. Because Seth Godin always says that ideas that are shared go up in value. And as soon as you start sharing and generously giving of yourself, it's weird how that just attracts more people. And those ideas immediately just like blossom.
And I think you've struck such a great chord with regards to cultures in businesses or in sports teams, and that if that fear of expression is eliminated, and I think it's very difficult, especially in a level of a BOC team, etc. But if you can somehow eliminate that fear of expression, I mean, the quality of the outputs is and maybe that's a big difference between the setups that worked and that didn't. Somehow, in that micro environment, whoever the lead was maybe able to create a little bit more freedom of expression, or amongst other things,
more generosity.
Absolutely. I'm and I said this to you a few days ago. I'm fascinated to hear about the difference between the two World Cups that you've recently covered. And I think obviously a lot of, not always apples with apples in a sense, but there were two different World Cups. Speak a bit about the two experiences and what you sort of took out of those.
What's interesting is that I worked with former cricketers so at the Cricket World Cup, what would happen is we'd go to the ground in the morning, and it's a very long day. Rugby obviously is a 4 or 5 hour production. Cricket is a 14-hour production. So you head to the ground first thing, and we'd record a live show to YouTube. We would do lives on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter. I would literally walk. So Graham Smith would be hosting the toss in the middle for the world feed. And I would be there as he walked out of the world feed. And we would be live on Instagram. So I'd be padding and say, he's busy over there. We're going to just corner him. And I would walk him off the pitch to the commentators area. And as we leave the pitch, we would talk through what just happened for digital. So everything I created went to the digital channels, but we utilized the analysts and the commentators they would use on the world feed. And so I would sit in the break room area, the holding room, where the commentators would all hang out, and they would rotate in and out into the commentary room. And so I got to observe them quite closely. I mean, these are guys from all over the world. And I do think that there is a very big difference between a lot of the same people would probably have been, A.B. de Villiers would probably have been an excellent rugby player. Herschel Gibbs, we know, was an exceptional rugby player. So I'm not saying that rugby players and cricket players are different people, but the environments that they spend a lot of time in do hone, they tend to behave differently. And so it was really interesting for me to just observe the difference between the rugby guys that I've worked with and seeing cricketers from across the world, across cultures and language barriers, behaving quite differently because they're more individual in their approach. They don't. I think rugby players over so many years have individualism almost kind of clobbered out of them. They have to be able to live in an incredibly tight-knit environment. Sevens even more so. But they need to be able to work in groups and excel in group environments where individualism isn't necessarily rewarded. Very few rugby players have strange, kind of interesting quirks in their personality, because usually that gets rounded over decades of living in very tight-knit team environments. Whereas I found that cricketers tend to be a little different in that way, in that their eccentricities are rewarded. You know, more kind of weird and wonderful than and edgy and kind of raspy. The
free thinking almost in a way.
Yeah, sometimes that gets rewarded, and in their commentary they also get to exhibit a bit more personality. And I found that really cool. Like, that was really nice for me. And I kind of, when I returned to rugby, felt that I really missed that level of, but obviously cricket gives you the space. So you have this real estate that you get to work with. And so that was really interesting. From an organizational point of view, what we did at the Cricket World Cup, we had bigger teams. We were working at venues. So I was traveling around the country. I was in, I would literally have a travel day, match day -1, where you are shooting at the venue the day before the match with both teams as they come into train. So you're packaging content and you're doing a live update. And then match day, you are doing live content and you're also rolling out some of the stuff that we shot yesterday. And then you have a travel day, match day -1, match day, travel day, match day -1, match day. And so that was my life for 9 weeks. I was in 3 different hotels a week. I was on trains every 3rd day. Sometimes I would have a match day where you're at a ground for 14 hours, go to the train station, straight from there, train into another city that evening and have a match the next day. Sometimes that match day -1, travel day was even compounded into just match day. And I saw Leeds, Liverpool, Newcastle, Bristol, Cardiff, Southampton. I saw a lot of England, which was really interesting and very different to what I've done in rugby before, because the Rugby World Cup in 2015, I only went where the Springboks went. This time around, I got to really kind of see the country, and I got to cover the Afghanistan team and the West Indies team, and you kind of get to see their personalities a bit more.
So to just quickly on that note, if you had to move to England right now, you had to move to a certain city, which one would it be? And if you had to follow any team bar South Africa as a result of the World Cup, who would you follow?
I would want to, if I couldn't live in London, obviously London is quite special. If I couldn't live in London, this is going to be weird because people who are English don't think so, but I love Manchester. I absolutely loved Manchester. I think Manchester is like the Joburg of England, which is probably why I like it. Manchester is like Berlin and like Johannesburg.
Okay.
It's not the hot sister. It's the one where the stuff happens.
Okay.
So I really enjoyed Manchester. And of the teams that I worked with, I would love to cover. Look, the England setup is the way that England runs professional sport is phenomenal to behold, both in rugby, but in cricket, and generally just the way they host events is brilliant. But the Kiwis were great.
Yeah.
I loved interviewing the Kiwis. I loved working with them. Their players had a great demeanor. They have a really nice laid-back vibe. And I think that there is definitely a big culture difference between us and the Southern Hemisphere, Kiwis, Aussies, and South Africans, and people from the Northern Hemisphere, from the subcontinent. Obviously, then that's a whole different culture in of itself. But we sometimes forget that we really have something in common with our Southern Hemisphere family. I really enjoyed dealing with them.
Are the New Zealanders just a little bit more sort of inclusive, or is it just something that you can't really put a finger on as to why? Is it just the fact that they're more similar to us?
They're not so serious.
Okay.
Which is weird. It's going to sound crazy because it's weird to say that a group of people are not serious, but there really just was this sense of relaxed ease that the ICC crew that I worked with came from all over the world, and they remarked that they got such a nice vibe from the Proteas, where the South African guys were just so nice and easygoing and fun, kind of keen to do kind of digital stuff with us, and they had a really nice relaxed demeanor when you got them on air as well. I didn't get that, definitely not from the England players. They're quite kind of studious. But definitely the Kiwis are a lot like South Africa in that sense.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting to hear it from your perspective, because I think you form a perception of these teams just from what you see on TV, etc. And it's obviously different when you get behind the cameras and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Manchester's an interesting one. I assumed you were going to be a Red Devils fan or something.
No, it's not even because of football. I mean, it's also interesting because it's such a sporting hotspot, not rugby, but sport. Yeah.
And tell me, to England's credit, I mean, their attendance from a sporting point of view is incredible. The number of people they get to games is just, I mean, you can cross sports and it's pretty much the same story.
Yeah.
Do you think it's just part of the culture? Is it the fact that they live in smaller environments there from a home perspective? Is it a combination of everything? Are they just sports mad? What do you think it is that gives them that edge?
It's really interesting because I was trying to figure this out myself. The way they host events is very different. They really go out of their way to adopt sports that they're not necessarily fans of. So I got the sense during the cricket that people really wanted to support the Cricket World Cup, even if they were not cricket fans. And when I was there in 2015 for the Rugby World Cup, I got the same vibe from people in cities like Birmingham and Newcastle, which they have their own rugby teams. I mean, the Sale Sharks are there, and Newcastle has their own. But I definitely got a sense that the wider populace really kind of they get stuck in when we're hosting something. We're all on board. It does help that it's an hour by train or an hour and a half by train from London to Cardiff. It is just so much easier to get around in the UK. And as a South African, it's incomprehensible. I mean, it's a 14-hour drive from here to Cape Town. So. And for them, the scale and the breadth, the reaches of South Africa is unthinkable. And even places like New Zealand and Australia, where cities are just spread out more, it is harder to really adopt a sporting event the way they can in England and in the UK in general, and in Europe for that matter. So it does serve them well, but I do think that there is a culture of sport being important. People live in small houses, in highly concentrated areas, and they have an active desire to get out, attend events, be physically active themselves, participate in the game on a grassroots level. And that was quite cool to see.
So it actually sparked another question, which I think a lot of our listeners, well, at least the sports mad ones, would love to know. So you've been to a lot of stadiums now as a result of your travels, etc.
Yes.
What is your favorite stadium to work in? Tough question, because I mean it's obviously
yeah. Look, that's really hard for me to answer, because it also, I think every event draws a different crowd. The way that the South African anthem is sung in Port Elizabeth is something to behold.
Really?
Ooh, it's like, I have goosebumps thinking of it. The times that I've worked on Test rugby in Port Elizabeth, like that entire town goes nuts. It's not a busy city. It's quite like small and sleepy.
Yeah.
And they just go off their heads for rugby. I love the way that PE hosts rugby, and I love the way they sing the anthem. So when that stadium in Port Elizabeth is actually full, it is spectacular.
Yeah.
I love Lords for just how Lordsy it is. It's just, it's like a relic from a bygone era in some weird way. And obviously it was just a spectacular event to have been there for that final, because it was so noisy and so unlike Lords, the way that that match, because the ICC took over the venue, and so it wasn't the NCC running the show anymore. So it was very different.
Were the O-Toppies still scoring with their books in the members section?
So that little pavilion was like this little outpost of like old school cricket vibe, and the rest of the ground was singing Sweet Caroline, which is like being at Loftus only in
amazing.
London, which was nuts. And I think as far as just once-off occasions, obviously Yokohama Stadium at the Rugby World Cup final was crazy, because I don't think South Africans realize, because on TV what they did, I watched it back, and they cheated you. They showed you on TV, they showed these small pockets of South Africans where it looked like they were just green. But they showed you every South African that was in that ground.
Possibly
they showed you every single one of them. It was 98% England support. I felt like at one point when I was on the pitch after the match, I looked behind me and saw Ramaphosa, Yuri Roo, Mark Alexander, a few dignitaries were standing behind me, and the players' wives were making their way down onto the pitch. And at that stage, I realized that there were probably more South Africans on the grass now than there are in the stands. We were so few and far between that winning that way in a stadium in Japan where there were just so many England fans, and then they started playing Narvik Leify, broke my brain into that was a moment where I was just like, I've been in Japan for 8 weeks now.
Yeah.
They are playing Narvik Leify on the PA system in Japan, and 98% of the people in the stadium is wearing England regalia. So that was just, watching the president cry behind me, listening to Narvik Leify on the PA system, that was nuts. That was like, I didn't feel like that was real.
Because there's a clip of you, I think they only showed it much later after the World Cup, of you and your reaction to when I think we won. And it was you then running onto the field, I think it was.
Yeah.
Was that
that was from Rugby World Cup Daily. That was the final show. Okay. So what we did on Rugby World Cup Daily, which was a World Rugby production, was I vlogged from the stadium for key matches. Like I vlogged from the stadium for Japan-Scotland. I vlogged from the stadium for the first South Africa-New Zealand match. But then the rest of the shows were not done from stadium. So that's the big difference between the Rugby and Cricket World Cup. Rugby World Cup, I was based in an office. I had a desk in Tokyo, and I couldn't travel around Japan because we had to deliver a show every day.
Okay.
And so every single day for 8 weeks, I didn't have a travel day. I didn't have a match day -1. It was just go, go, go. And that's why I couldn't go to venue. But I did go to venue for about 6 games. And the final was going to be the last match day vlog, where it literally is just me and a GoPro camera on the train, walking to the stadium, talking to people, going, woo! And then obviously also crying. So that clip that you saw was, the GoPro was still rolling, but I wasn't actively shooting.
Okay.
I cried obviously an immense amount and tried not to, but then the edit, I'm not sitting in the edit because I'm sleeping. So we had a dual team system where I had a cameraman with me who had a camera and then my little GoPro, and we were shooting footage, but we shot 7-8 hours of footage. And now we've had a long day. Show needs to go out tomorrow. So we hand over the footage, and then someone else sits and ingests and edits it. And then it goes out after another team member has reviewed it. Wow. So it's this relay because there's not enough of us and we need sleep.
Yeah.
So I didn't see that until it had already gone out. And the other thing is I wasn't actively filming. It was just me still vlogging. I'm walking around with the GoPro in my hand like this. And I cried. I did film myself crying with other fans. And I was holding the camera as I was walking, wiping away my tears, which is what you see, because I was trying to compose myself and then talking to the camera. But obviously, you're only seeing the edit. So I wasn't just gratuitously bawling on camera consistently, but obviously this is real life. And then when I was waiting downstairs because we had these set up interview areas and we were allocated one, and my cameraman was going to come join me and I was going to interview players. So I interviewed Cheslin and his wife. I interviewed the Beast. I interviewed Sia. So the accredited media members of the media, and then World Rugby, we each had a little bay. So I was waiting next to the pitch for the bays to be set up so that once they lift the trophy and they should spray the champagne, then the players would be circulated around to us. And I was just standing there waiting, obviously crying, because I could just see the president crying behind me, which was weird. And then they start playing Narvik Leify and my brain can't cope anymore. And I'm literally just like, and the next thing, Sia notices me and he comes over, and we did have this conversation probably about 2 months before the World Cup, where I did say to him, we were talking about something else and decisions that he'd taken in his career. He was going to go to Japan, and then he decided to stay in South Africa after the Rugby World Cup regardless. And he said he couldn't go to Japan because he couldn't go play in Japan, go play club rugby in Japan, because he went home to Sweden and he just saw the need in his township and he couldn't leave. There's so much work that needs to be done here. And he'd said years before in another entirely different conversation to me that his responsibility is towards his immediate family. He needs to make as much money as he can while he's playing rugby because that's his job. He needs to look after his people. And then he'd had this moment where he thought, you know what, I can still make enough money to look after my family and my immediate people without leaving the country. And I think I should stay here. And then I said to him this in this conversation 2 months before the World Cup, but if you are giving up the opportunity to go make a lot of cash in Japan because you feel like you need to do some work here, then the only way that you're going to be able to do really brilliant work here is if you win the World Cup. There's no point in going to Japan and finishing fourth. If you want to really be able to change stuff in South Africa, the most important thing you can actually do is win the World Cup. That's where everything starts, and that is ultimately going to give you the platform to really affect change. You have it's open in front of you now. You just need to win it here and then go. And then he said, yeah. And so that's what he was alluding to when he walked up and he said, you told us to win it. You told us to win the World Cup, and we did it. Oh, wow. And it was because we'd had that conversation where I said, there's no point in staying behind in South Africa and playing your Super Rugby here. If you are not going to win the World Cup, you're never going to reach the heights that you really can. You're never going to have that impact that that the potential needs to be fulfilled there. And so that's what he was referring to. It wasn't I said it. It was more a conversation around, this is your potential. You now need to live up to it. This is your gap. You probably, no one knows whether you're going to be fit in 4 years' time. So you need to win this World Cup with what you have and the people you have around you.
Absolutely. And it was quite touch and go, I suppose, from an injury point of view for him.
Exactly.
Leading up.
Yeah. So I said, and so that's what he was referring to, but I wasn't sure. I didn't know that we'd captured this because I think I was holding it in my left hand and the camera was dropped down below. So I just hugged it.
That's right.
And that's also why you hear me. I mean, it's so embarrassing, just crying, because I wasn't planning on filming this. It was just a moment where I couldn't cope with what was happening right now.
Well, you're not going to get any more authentic and real than that. So,
I mean it's, embarrassing now watching it back. I'm just like, could I not just have cried nicely?
And I think you'll look back on that one day when you call it a day, and it'll be one of the more special moments, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Wow, yeah, thanks for sharing that with us. It's such a. I mean, obviously, we were all going berserk on this side, but it must have been quite special to be that close to the to the action, and obviously to Cyril and all that kind of stuff. Especially at this time, we certainly need to remember those moments. I wanted to ask you one or two last questions, just with regards to, especially on the productivity side. You run a really hectic schedule in the normal sphere of things. You're up early every day. You're doing a lot of things. For the people that really are trying to be more productive, because I think, the one commodity we just don't have enough of is time. Is there anything you can share like that really works for you in terms of just keeping yourself ahead of the game, just making sure that, you're not on the back foot, even though sometimes there are some curveballs that come along?
I think the thing is just that I'm not one of those people who does one thing well. So I recognized very long ago that I kind of constantly need to have three things going, because having too much on my plate is the only thing that focuses me into being really productive. The more I do, the more I seem to be able to do. The less I do, the less I seem to be able to do. Interesting.
Yeah, so I think knowing yourself and knowing what gets you going and creating that environment for yourself is obviously key.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. And then the other question that we always ask our guests at the end of the interview, which is quite a unique one, I suppose, is that if you could, and as a well-traveled individual, this might be quite a challenge for you, but if you could visit only one restaurant for the rest of your life, which restaurant would that be?
I would probably force my husband to open one, because he cooks like a dream. All of my favorite dishes are ones that he makes. And I'm very, very fortunate in that we've got a kitchen right here, and I'm holed up with him for 21 days. I think the restaurant would probably be Van der Linde, which is a local restaurant here in my neighborhood that I can walk to. Which I love because they make a nice variety of stuff, and they make the best eggs Benedict in all of Johannesburg.
Well, there you go. It's that says all about your personality. I think anyone who enjoys a good eggs Benedict knows where they're grounded. I think a world without a good eggs Benedict would be a very sad place.
Sad.
Yeah, hollandaise sauce is an art in itself, I think. I just wanted to say thank you so much for your time. It's been really, really awesome to chat. I think the listeners can take so much value out of your context and your story. And I think just acknowledge what you've done, and in a not an easy way, and not just a sort of an easy path. You've done an amazing job. So we want to wish you every success in the future. And I look forward to following that progress as you carry on.
Oh, thank you, man. Thanks for the chat. It was really good fun. And if anyone disagrees with me or has strong opinions or feels like they really relate to anything I've said, please tell me. I generally really don't mind people either throwing stones or giving high fives.
Where can everyone get hold of you or follow you and sort of follow your journey from here?
At Elma Kapelma on Twitter and on Instagram. I'm on TikTok as well, but I'm still figuring that one out. So don't go there.
That's it for today, guys. If this episode brought you value, please do subscribe to the podcast series. And for more information on building your organizational culture, visit us at rcaconsulting.biz. We'll see you in the next episode.